Hey guys, tonight we begin with a quiet, gentle drift into the less illuminated corners of medieval life, the lives of female servants in the Middle Ages. Grab a blanket, dim the lights, settle in. No dramatic battles, no thrones or crowns. Well, only indirectly. Just the soft hum of daily toil, of women behind the scenes, doing the work that rarely makes the epic history books. Because yes, someone had to haul the water, scrub the hearth, run the errands, mind the children, patch the clothes, and sometimes live in a household not their own. And of course, they were, in their own way, tiny engines in the medieval machine of lordship, service, dependence, and ambition. We're going to float from the broad panorama into the nitty-gritty of what it might have meant to serve in a castle, manor house, or urban household. We'll meet you in the kitchens, the attics, the dormitories where servants slept. We'll look at conditions, at expectations, at what service could mean for a woman, socially, economically, personally, and we'll keep the tone gentle, a whisper rather than a shout as we drift through the centuries. In the medieval period, one of the key frameworks for understanding women's lives is the tripartite division of society: clergy, nobility, and peasantry, or serfs. A handy schematic if one wants to generalize. For women, this meant that the possibilities were constrained by class, by marriage, by household, by labor. But within those constraints, the category of female servant opens up interesting textures, not only the manned-in-the-minutes tasks, but the transitions, the dependencies, the opportunities, yes, even for women in service, and the vulnerabilities. World History Encyclopedia, +2 first. What do I mean by female servant? I don't mean only the highest skilled lady-in-waiting, though I'll mention her, or the very lowest kitchen drudge, though she matters. I mean the broad spectrum, young women, often unmarried, who entered households not their own, sometimes from rural homes or from other towns, working for an employer or mistress of higher status. Their terms of labor varied. Some might be paid wages, others given board and lodging, or room and board, plus small stipend. Some would hope to gain a dowry or marry up. Some would remain lifelong in service. The records are thinner for female servants than for male ones, but historians have begun to fill in the contours. For example, the work of P.J.P. Goldberg shows how urban service for women in Yorkshire circa 1300 to 1500 changed over time. OUP Academic Understanding. The service relationship means seeing it as labor and social relation. The servant woman is embedded in labor, doing tasks. Embedded in the household, living somewhere, subject to masters, mistresses. And embedded in the economy, wages, board, mobility. For example, being disposable members of the household, servants were caught in webs of dependence, with the youngest and least qualified workers nearing the bottom of the domestic hierarchy. That phrase, disposable members, sounds harsh, and it is, but it helps us see the power dynamics. Medievalists.net, meanwhile, households themselves vary. The great noble household with dozens of servants, the urban merchant's house, the rural manor. Each provides different settings. The tasks of female servants changed with setting and status. For example, in great houses, female servants might be scullery maids, chambermaids, laundry maids. In smaller houses, the servant might be semi-indistinguishable from other household members. Economic History Society +1. Let's float then gently into some of the key features of their lives. Living and working conditions. Picture a castle or manor house in the 14th or 15th century. The big hall, the parlor, the lord and lady downstairs. Then the servants' quarters, often cramped, often cold, often communal. Life as a servant in a medieval fortress was anything but luxurious. Servants had limited access to bathing facilities. The air was often thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, damp straw, and smoke from the hearth. Epic history facts. So there's the first contrast, the gentle flicker of torchlight in a noble chamber. Down the stairs, the dull scrape of broom on stone in the kitchen. A female servant might sleep on a pallet, roll up straw on the floor, near other servants, near the kitchen, near the sooty chimney. The privacy we take for granted, rarely there. The hours, long. The labor, unending. In addition to physical labor, scrubbing pots, hauling firewood, boiling water, washing cloth, a female servant often had to move between household domains, inside the house, outside, errands in town. Research shows that female domestic servants in England between 1550 to 1650, just a little past our medieval mark, spent only about half their time inside the home. The rest of the time they might be in fields, streets, marketplaces, so they were not invisible ghosts. They moved, they served, they negotiated the household and the world outside. Economic History Society. The wage question is interesting too. While male servants sometimes have clear wage records, female servants often earned less, not surprisingly. For example, a live-in manservant might be paid as little as 4 pence per week. A live-in woman servant can expect little more than half this. That gives us a sense of the economic position. Laborer, servant, board, and lodging, small stipend. Reddit tasks and skills. What did a female servant do? It depended on status, size of the household, type of house, but there were common threads. In larger households, among the female servants, you might find roles like chambermaid, cleaning the lady's chamber, dealing with her wardrobe, making beds, scullery maid, bottom rank in the kitchen maids, cleaning dishes, pots, scaling fish, plucking fowl. For example, in the great houses, scullery maids were the lowest ranked and often the youngest. Duties included cleaning and scouring the floor, stoves, sinks, pots, and dishes, Mrs. Alfred. There was also sewing, mending, laundry, fetching water, working the hearth. One medieval source for chambermaid says, "Let there be also a chambermaid, whose face may charm and render tranquil the chamber. She must have scissors and a spool of thread and various sizes of needles." That line is rich because it pairs the labor, mending, with the idea of face may charm and render tranquil the chamber. A woman whose presence was to be decorous, even soothing, in the noble household. Cornell courses. The servants' tasks were more than brute labor. They required skill, stamina, reliability. They ranked the labor force, yes, but they also required navigating power, living in someone else's household, obeying, yet sometimes making small choices. In rural and urban service alike, the term of service had implications for marriage, mobility, and family. See Servants and Servanthood, chapter. OUP Academic Social Position, Mobility, and Marriage. Here we touch on the more subtle stuff. A female servant was socially lower than the mistress of the house, but could be socially mobile, relatively speaking, via service. One major route, serving in a noble or well-off household, gave access to social networks, to skills, to possibilities of a better marriage, or at least a better economic starting point. As an excerpt from Ladies-in-Waiting in Medieval England says, families sought to promote their daughters and wives at court and in great households, because female servants could gain both remunerations and intangible patronage opportunities for themselves, their families, and their associates. So the female servant role could be an embedded part of a family's strategy. Cambridge Assets. However, also, many female servants were young, unmarried, uprooted from home, vulnerable. Researchers in Montpellier show that some were moved, contracts, away from their families to live and serve, and that the relationship between servant and master or mistress could be complicated. Some parents and tutors may have feared potential abuses, requesting the drafting of a contract to have legal guarantees. Also, the economic terms mattered. What is the indenture? What is the contract? What happens at marriage? What payment is expected? Medievalists.net marriage. In many cases, working as a servant was transitional. A young woman would serve for a few years, accumulate some skills or dowry, then marry. In other cases, service was longer term or even lifelong, especially in large households. The awkward fact, the identity of a servant carried connotations of dependency and subordination, but also, sometimes, of loyalty and professionalism. The emotional and daily life, little stories, the physical facts we can more easily document. The emotional life is harder, but let's give a sense of what the inner texture might have been. Waking before dawn, especially in summer, layering on a plain wool dress, sturdy shoes, going to the kitchen, the scullery, the wells, spinning wool, mending cloth, fetching wood, hauling water from the well. The daily life of a peasant woman started as early as 3 a.m. Women generally ate when her husband and children had finished and had little leisure time. For a servant, similar, or worse. Medieval life and times. There would have been a communal life with other servants. The mistress of the house, sometimes aloof, sometimes stern. The kitchen fire, the clink of dishes, the smell of sweat, of cooking fats, of damp stone. The social gulf between servant and mistress existed, but they shared the same household roof, if not the same rights. The servant might sleep near the kitchen, endure cold nights, share beds or pallets. The privacy was minimal. Yet, there could be pride. Historians say, despite the hard work, servants took pride in their work and played a vital role in the social and economic fabric. The role of service mattered. Without servants, noble households wouldn't function. Without these women doing the tasks, the great lords and ladies couldn't maintain their status. It's easy to overlook. Medieval Chronicles. So with that broader canvas drawn, next we'll transition in part 2 to specific cases. The elite female servants, ladies-in-waiting, and how their lives differed, or didn't, from the more ordinary serving women. We'll also look at some of the darkest edges of service, the precariousness, the dependency, the loss of agency. And we'll keep drifting slowly. No jarring shifts, no dramatics, just the soft hum of history's lesser-told stories. Part 2. The ladies who served the ladies. Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you've settled in again. Maybe your blanket's warmer now, maybe the tea's just the right temperature. Tonight, we're floating upward from the smoky kitchens of medieval castles into the slightly more perfumed but equally complicated world of ladies-in-waiting, those female servants who attended queens, princesses, and noblewomen. They were technically servants, yes, but also confidants, companions, and sometimes political pawns. Think of them as the middle management of medieval womanhood, close enough to power to see it shimmer, but rarely allowed to hold it. Let's take it slow. The concept of a lady-in-waiting evolved from the broader system of court service, where noble households functioned like miniature worlds. Each high-ranking woman had her own small court of attendants, maids, nurses, governesses, wardrobe mistresses, and those fancier companions who could be trusted to pour the wine and maybe, just maybe, hear the gossip before everyone else. And in true medieval fashion, this wasn't just a job, it was social choreography. A dance between rank, loyalty, and appearances. The social ladder of service. In the hierarchy of the noble household, rank was everything, almost as sacred as religion. The lady of the house ruled over her female servants, much like her husband ruled over his knights. Below her stood the gentlewomen, young daughters of minor nobles sent to court for Polish or connections. They were the interns of the medieval elite. Unpaid, overgroomed, and constantly watching how to behave in rooms full of people more important than themselves. Then came the maids of honor, the more prestigious attendants to queens and princesses. They dressed elegantly by medieval standards, which meant heavy fabric, laces, and probably a permanent neck strain. Their job? Be present, look graceful, laugh at the right jokes, avoid scandal, although that last one didn't always go well. Finally, at the base were the serving women, still technically part of the lady's household, but very much staff. They cooked, cleaned, dressed their mistresses, carried messages, and did everything that made noble life look effortlessly beautiful on the surface. One historian dryly noted that service was both employment and education, submission, and strategy. That's a polite academic way of saying this was a world where your hairstyle and your humility could decide your future. The training ground of power, becoming a lady-in-waiting was, in some families, a career move. For ambitious, noble houses, sending a daughter to serve a queen wasn't about loyalty. It was about networking. The closer you were to a royal ear, the better your family's chances of climbing the social ladder. Imagine a 14-year-old girl packed off to the royal court by her parents. She might have grown up in a quiet countryside manor, but now she's surrounded by golden tapestries, endless ceremonies, and the constant hum of gossip. Her days are a rotation of sewing, walking with her mistress, and trying to look interested while courtiers argue over who gets to stand closer to the throne. There's a reason so many royal scandals started with ladies-in-waiting. They were there, always nearby. The confidants of queens, but also the witnesses to kings' wandering eyes. The line between servant and victim could be painfully thin, but on the more respectable side, service could also lead to power marriages. Many noblewomen met their husbands at court through this system. It was like the medieval version of networking on LinkedIn, except you had to balance a heavy headdress while doing it. The reality behind the silks. Now let's strip the glamour a bit. Being a lady-in-waiting wasn't exactly a fairy tale. Sure, the dresses were beautiful if you could breathe in them, but the workload was constant. Early mornings meant attending to the queen's toilette. That's the fancy word for helping her get dressed, managing her jewels, preparing embroidery materials, or holding the train of her gown during ceremonies. And yes, that means exactly what you think. It was physically exhausting. Imagine hours of standing still, pretending to be interested in long Latin prayers, or walking slowly behind your mistress while holding layers of fabric that could weigh more than you. There were also emotional burdens. You were expected to be charming, but not flirtatious, educated, but not opinionated, close to your mistress, but never presumptuous. Essentially, your job was to have a personality, but only the parts that were useful to someone else. And of course, there was the constant court drama. The rivalry among ladies-in-waiting was almost a sport. Alliances formed and broke faster than you could lace a corset. One historian of the English court said it best. The friendships of court ladies were like the mirrors they carried, fragile, polished, and always reflecting someone more powerful. When things went wrong, the potential for scandal was always hovering in the background. Royal courts were rumor factories, and the ladies-in-waiting were both the employees and the raw material. Let's take an example from France. In the 14th century, during the reign of Philip IV, the infamous Tour de Nesle affair erupted when the king's daughters-in-law were accused of adultery with the help of their ladies-in-waiting. Allegedly, the women smuggled lovers into the palace using the help of their servants. When the truth, or at least the accusation, came out, several people were executed, and the royal image was shattered. It's unclear whether the ladies were guilty or just convenient scapegoats, but their fate shows how service could be both opportunity and danger. Being close to power meant being close to scandal. And it wasn't just France. In Tudor England, yes, we're drifting slightly forward in time, the ladies around Anne Boleyn learned that lesson brutally. Their queen's downfall dragged many of them into interrogation and disgrace. Even if you did nothing wrong, guilt by proximity was very real. The quiet ones. Not every story ends in tragedy or gossip. Some ladies-in-waiting lived long, steady lives of service, quietly maintaining the dignity of their mistresses. Their names are mostly lost, tucked into the margins of household accounts. Item to Joan the gentlewoman for the tending of the lady's linen, 6 shillings. That's the kind of line that turns up in dusty ledgers, small, almost invisible, but full of meaning. These women were the keepers of secrets, the hands that dressed queens, the ones who ensured the royal world didn't unravel. They left no monuments, no chronicles, no descendants of note. But without them, the entire illusion of noble life, the ceremony, the beauty, the calm, would have fallen apart. One chronicler even remarked, with understated honesty, "A good servant is like a shadow, always present, never seen." Between servitude and sisterhood, the relationship between mistress and servant could vary wildly. Some were affectionate, almost maternal. Others were coldly transactional. There are letters, like those of Margaret of Austria to her attendants, showing warmth, gifts, and shared grief. And then there are records of mistresses suing or beating their maids for insolence. It was, in a sense, an emotional economy. The mistress provided protection, the servant provided devotion. The danger came when either side forgot which direction that loyalty was supposed to flow. Some mistresses relied deeply on their ladies-in-waiting, not just for chores, but for company, comfort, and sanity. After all, even queens could be lonely. Catherine of Aragon, for instance, clung to her Spanish attendants after arriving in England, keeping them as her last link to home. They weren't just servants, they were her language, her food, her memories. When service became survival, for many women, being a lady-in-waiting or a servant wasn't about glamour at all. It was survival, employment, lodging, and meals in a world where few women could own property or earn a living independently. The paradox is striking. These were women surrounded by gold and power, yet living on the edge of poverty. Some were dismissed without pension when their mistresses died. Others followed new queens like loyal ghosts into unfamiliar courts. And if you were dismissed in disgrace, good luck. Few households wanted a servant tainted by rumor, and there was no safety net. Your options were marriage, if anyone would have you, or drifting downward into poor domestic work. The English word waiting takes on a kind of poetic cruelty here. That's what so many of these women did. Waited. Waited for a chance, for a marriage, for kindness, for history to notice them. Most of the time, it didn't. So as we close this part, let's take a quiet moment for all those unnamed women whose hands wove the threads of royal life. The invisible ones who carried gowns, held letters, wiped tears, and smiled when they were expected to.